Needless to say.
Needless to say, I agree.
The problem, needless to say, is the cost involved.
All this, needless to say, had been culled second-hand from radio reports. Needless to say, we spent a lot of time together, and regarded them as good friends.
Needless to say, the actual business of getting cooperative, worldwide action on climate change would be much more complicated and tendentious than this discussion suggests.
Needless to say, there are numerous domains and applications that are most naturally rendered by such flow-based descriptions. Sarkozy, needless to say, did not walk anywhere but to the photo session, to have his picture taken with Obama. All these cuts add up, needless to say, for a federal budget already straining to the tune of trillion-plus annual deficits. Needless to say, not a single kitchen computer is recorded as having sold.
Needless to say, an open line of communication between the designer and the client is imperative at this stage. Needless to say, I was thrilled, but that is the very moment at which my progress stopped.
Needless to say, this sort of thing can take hours.
And needless to say, these aren't just words, they have attached some rather alarming pictures, or rather. Needless to say, this attracted some curious foreigners. Needless to say, our client was also delighted by the speedy results. Needless to say, this appeals to many teenagers, but it is a totally disastrous attitude both spiritually and in terms of maturity.
Needless to say, such health systems very poorly prepared to cope with the demands and costs of chronic care.
Needless to say, this is a tedious process. Needless to say, autonomy and integrity are two important prerequisites for federation.
Needless to say, I was exhausted from labored breathing, a lung infection, pain, tests, effort expended to correct data model errors, energy wasted giving my medical history, and lack of sleep.
Needless to say, investors have every reason to fret. Needless to say, most of these purchases are still underwater.
Needless to say, this is not to be done unless you are absolutely sure you want to give your users that level of control over your programs.
Needless to say, a certain part of the brain lights up when the jaw is so engaged, but what that proves is hard to tell.
Needless to say, the results of my little project were unsurprising, which shouldn't be a surprise. Needless to say, I shopped only from the sale racks and pieced together barely acceptable outfits to wear to my mostly casual workplace.